Hello, everybody. This is going to be uh, broadcast both on YouTube and as episode 3 of my podcast. Again, I'm shifting to do both for the time being as a hedge against something possibly happening with YouTube, and also because people have been just suggesting that I go into a podcast venue for a long time. Many people over the years have said that they like to just listen to what I say without watching the video, which obviously is insulting to my looks, but I'll accept that. So this is a little bit new for me. It looks like I'm able to record both at the same time, so fairly simply, but it is going to be a little bit different. So, apologies for any technical difficulties, but this is a really good way to get two birds with one stone. So along those lines, if you're newer, you haven't seen this yet, I am switching to a podcast and a YouTube channel. I'm going to do both. The content is not going to be perfect on either one. Some of the live streams on YouTube are probably not going to become podcasts, and some material is just going to be for the podcast and not for YouTube. I haven't decided how I want to square it. There's going to be obviously a lot of parallels between the two, but it's necessary. So along those announcements, I'll put in a link. So I do have a podcast channel. It's pretty rudimentary, but you can get the episodes there. It's on Stitcher, and I just found out tonight that it's also on iTunes, on Apple iTunes. So I'll put links to all of those in the description if you guys want to take a look at that. This will be the third episode of the podcast on there. And like I said, if this works, I'm going to probably start converting some of my older YouTube videos onto that, especially ones that I particularly like or that are particularly popular, because I really wouldn't want to lose that stuff necessarily. So that aside, I want to get into a little bit of topic here. So this is something I have covered before, but it's a very common critique about libertarianism. And it's a critique about libertarianism because there's an actual real point here. And the idea is that libertarianism and libertarians talk so much about individual liberty, individual rights, the right of the individual, self-ownership, all these things like that. And many people think, well, those sound good. Maybe there's some merit to that, but at the end of the day, humans are not atomistic individuals. Humans are social animals. Humans need to live with each other. They need to work together, or if they don't work together, they live very poor, terrible lives. And this is considered to be some kind of great critique about libertarianism. Well, first of all, one of the problems with this argument is that it proves too much. Basically, I've heard this argument invoked by communists, by socialists, by syndicalists, by Republicans, right? So conservatives are like, look, you can't just be an atomistic individual. You need to be part of a nation. By nationalists, obviously. And maybe most famously by absolute monarchists, of the types of Thomas Hobbes, right? He thought that society should be subsumed into a leviathan with an absolute monarch. And it's funny that people will cite him and cite his critiques of anarchy, but then they won't actually support the political system that he was writing that for. Hobbes wasn't saying we should have a democracy or mixed democratic capitalist state or communism. He was saying an absolute monarch. And so it's interesting that people make this very large leap from humans are not atomistic individual animals, that they're social in some sense, to whatever type of society I want is thereby justified. So that's a big problem with it. But the other problem is that libertarians are not atomistic individuals in that sense. Obviously, there is a strain of primitive anarchism, or people who believe that you should go back to nature and whatnot. But this is not a super common view. Obviously, I think most libertarians would tolerate that, right? No one's going to say if you want to go be a hermit that you can't or that you shouldn't, as long as you're not trespassing or aggressing against somebody. But libertarians don't. There's a methodological reason to focus on the individual, but that's not to say that the individuals can't or shouldn't cooperate, just that the nature of that cooperation is important. And again, people make this very big logical leap from, well, we need to cooperate, we're social, to whatever system I want. But that justification would justify any system that involves people working together. So that would justify slavery, that would justify communism or capitalism, right? Socialists like to invoke this a lot, but even the most crony, exploitative, capitalist system that you can imagine would still be people working together, right? There's the fat cat on the top, and everyone has to work, work for pennies on the day or they'll starve. Well, that's still people working together, so it's, not atomistic individualism. It really matters. And libertarians, for both for both utilitarian and deontological reasons, or depends on which ones you ask, but they will invoke both, think that the nature of that cooperation should be based on the autonomy of the individual and on voluntary mutual exchange. So people want to agree to work as an employee for a factory, as the overwhelming majority of people prefer to do when given the option. That should be allowed. But if they want to work in a commune, that should be allowed. And if they want to be a subsistence farmer or a hermit or a homeless person who begs, that also should be allowed. If they want to join a religious convent that lives together communally, they should be allowed to do that. The problem is when you come and go to people and say, regardless of what you want, we are going to impose a solution on you, which is what, essentially all the other political systems are doing. So we're not at, and I don't know of any, maybe there are exceptions here, but the vast majority of libertarians are not isolated atomists. And what's more than that, libertarianism is probably one of the most economically influenced philosophies. Marxism probably being the other one that is heavily, heavily influenced by economics. Now, Marxism is influenced by a discredited old school labor theory, or as they would call law of value economics, which other economists don't really take seriously. Libertarianism draws on a couple different schools. Obviously, the Austrian school is very popular, which, again, that one is also not taken seriously by a big part of the academic world. But then also by monetarists and other types of classical liberal economists that do have a wider appeal within academia. So, but regardless, almost all libertarians are steeped in reading economic authors. If you're a libertarian and you read anything, you're going to end up reading Rothbard and Mises. You're probably going to read some Adam Smith, Ricardo, F.A. Hayek, Milton Friedman, David Friedman. The list goes on and on and on and on. And a libertarian's probably going to have more economists on his bookshelf than just about anybody else. Certainly, like a conservative's not going to read that many economists. And if he does read any, there's a very good chance it's going to be Milton Friedman or F.A. Hayek or Adam Smith. And the same with most left-wing people. Again, I think the exception would be Marxists. I think Marxists also are probably going to read a lot of economics. They're just going to read Marxist economics, which ultimately don't make a lot of sense. They don't bear much scrutiny. But that is one of the many ways in which libertarianism and Marxists are kind of mirrors of each other. Not necessarily perfect mirrors, but similar enough. The point, though, is that the study of economics is just the study of how people interact with each other. The division of labor, costs, price cutting, supply and demand, all this stuff. Right? So in a way, libertarians are almost obsessed with the fact that humans aren't individuals and that they do cooperate, and they want to understand why and how and what. Now, if you're an Austrian, or even if you're not, the scope of economics, if you define it very broadly, you end up in a position where you can't really explain that much, because you could just say axiomatically everything people do is economic. Most people tend to have this view that economics is much more narrow, that it has to do with numbers and graphs and finance. And so when somebody decides to not take their kids or to take their kids out Christmas shopping or to the beach, that's not really economic or whatever. Or if they decide I want to sleep in today or whatever, that's not necessarily economic, when a broader conception of economics would include all that. But what I'm saying here is that there's a lot of insights that can be had about how people organize that aren't necessarily strictly libertarian. Like, as long as it's voluntary, we're not going to object, but that doesn't mean that everything is equally the same or that everything has the same outcome. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a book here that I've been wanting to read for a long time, and it's been on my bookshelf for a long time. And I didn't actually read it. I listened to it on audiobook, but I do have a copy here, and it's you've probably heard of it. It's called Bowling Alone by Robert Puttnum. Here we are. Now, this book is very often cited by the alt-right, although it's actually fairly well known, and race realists too. It's fairly well known in academia, and although it's debated, it's respected, at least, right? Nobody considers this guy a kook. I think he taught at Harvard. He references New Hampshire and Boston a lot. You can tell he's from there, and you can tell he's Jewish too, because he references all this nomenclature from Ashkenazi Yiddish circles. But basically, the subtitle here: The Collapse and Revival of American Community. So what Puttnam is doing here is he's looking at social engagement among people. He's looking at how socially engaged are they? And there's lots of metrics you could use to measure that. And so the first several chapters of the book are about attempting to even demonstrate that this is a thing. And you can gauge this. How much time do people spend home alone? How much time do they spend in clubs, at churches, at work, at picnics, doing recreational things, on club sports teams? The title of the book is Bowling Alone is inspired by bowling leagues. There was a time when bowling leagues were extremely popular, and a huge proportion of the American adult population was a member of a bowling league. And before that, the same could be said with bridge clubs. Bridge clubs were enormously popular through the 50s and somewhat before. And before that, whist, which is a game I'd never really heard of before. And we can measure quantitatively that this has changed. And he also measures things like political engagement. How much do people vote? How much do people organize? He makes distinctions between the various types of involvement. So it's one thing to be a member of a club where you pay maybe an annual fee and you get their magazine, but you don't actually ever meet other members. You don't travel. You don't know any members. You're just you're subscribing to this. And he talks about how there's a certain way where that division of labor makes sense, right? You're having, you want to have an issue that you care about. So he cites like the Audubon Society or PETA or AARP or any number of other organizations. Like, well, you care about this, so you want to help, so you give money. Well, that's fine. He's not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but you're not really being civically engaged. It's not like the Elks Club where you go and you know the local Elks. And he tells a story here. I don't think it's in the first chapter, but near on, where this man in, I think it was in Flint, Michigan, it was somewhere in Michigan, needed a kidney, and someone on his bowling league donated his kidney. It's like, well, they're just on a bowling league. You could almost imagine, like, well, if they had both been in the Marines and they had fought in D-Day, and, well, D-Day, the Marines weren't in D-Day, but, you know, they'd say they'd been in Easy Company in the 101st, and they were in the Band of Brothers, and he didn't want his brother to die, so he donated his kidney. Like, you could almost understand that, like, a bowling league? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And he's saying, but those bonds become very real and become very personal for a lot of people, and that there's something very valuable about that. There's the interaction there that you're getting that you're not getting when you send in your dues once a year or get the mailing list. And he talks about the number of chartered organizations in D.C. in the Beltway and how many of them actually have chapters around the country that actually meet, and that's actually surprising tiny numbers, something like less than 10%. I think it was even less than 5%. And most of the ones that did were much older organizations that had been around since the turn of the century. There was a great bloom of voluntary associations when Democracy in America, who wrote that? When he visited America in the 1830s, he wrote about that. Saying that Americans love to form associations, they love to get together and say, let's have a club to do this, let's have a club to do that. There's a big explosion of this in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and many of those organizations are gone, but many of those organizations that are still around today that made it, those are the ones that still account for most of the activity. And most of the newer organizations don't. We don't have too many newer organizations starting where people meet, where people are involved, where they're getting to know each other. They might be a formal organization again that you have a membership in, that you pay, but you're just not as engaged. And again, he goes to church attendance, sports, all that. So the first part of the book is basically demonstrating there's been a collapse in it's significant. You can debate whether you want to call it catastrophic or not, but in terms of civil engagement. And he also talks about professionalization of the political class, right? So fewer and fewer people are running for office. Fewer and fewer people are writing letters to the editor. Fewer and fewer people are going to political meetings to speak. You basically just have full-time employees, full-time professional campaigners who are running the campaigns, not necessarily volunteers. Volunteers will show up a little bit, but the show is being run by hardcore professionals. And that means that professional class is not really the same as the people, the constituencies that they nominally represent. So then he goes into what's more interesting, I think, which a lot of people are kind of more curious about. What I would be more curious about is, why is this happening? First of all, there's kind of ebbs and flows. So it's easy to say it's declined now, but it's not like the peak that we formerly on was some kind of plateau that extended back through all time. And that's one problem with the book, is that he's looking in the late 20th century and he's judging a decline that's basically started in the 50s, early 60s, and then became pretty obvious in the 70s and 80s. But that's not to say that that period that he's starting from was through time immemorial. And he does talk a little bit about that. It's just that the data becomes much, much weaker when we go before the 20th century. But, among the many candidates here, we have urban sprawl, we have mass media, and we have the society becoming a lower trust society, which is both a cause and also an effect of this. So, when people are more trusting of each other, when they're out, when people are engaging socially with each other, they're probably going to have a higher trust. But also, if they don't trust their neighbors, they're less likely to engage. So that's kind of a chicken and the egg question that's hard to parse out. One thing that he cites that is very popular among the alt-right and race realists is that the more diverse a society is, basically the lower the trust. And I forget the exact number, but it can basically decrease by half if you go from a fairly homogeneous society to a fairly mixed one. But the one that he singles out the most, that seems to be the most clearly indicated with the very best evidence, is television, actually. And we don't know exactly why, but there seems to be some very good evidence. There were some studies done in Canadian cities that did not have television and then had television introduced, and there was quite a dramatic effect on social engagement in all those towns. And then we can see it in the United States as well with the introduction of television in the first generations to grow up watching television. Now, why television would be so detrimental is a very good question. There's something like a pseudo relationship. So you watch TV and you feel like those characters, whether it's the news or whether it's a sitcom. Your brain kind of thinks that there's a social interaction there, but there's not. That person, although that is a real person somewhere, they're acting probably if it's a show, or even if it's a news, they're putting on a persona, but they certainly don't know you. They're not going to interact with you. It's not going to be a dialogue. It's going to be you just kind of vicariously observing this. And ultimately, that's not going to be nearly as satisfying, but you can have it for free. One of the things about television, it's the lowest in terms of cost. You just sit down, you don't have to think, you don't have to worry about, you don't have to engage. Even reading, even listening to the radio requires you to be more engaged, or listening to a book or a podcast than to just watching television. Maybe I guess that's a good reason to listen to the podcast and not watch the YouTube channel. By the way, the book was written at the end of the 1990s, in the very early 2000s. I think it was published maybe 2000, 2001. Of course, the internet existed then, and he starts to talk about it. It was before social media. It was before it had really bloomed. So it would be really great if he could write, if he's still alive, and I don't know if he is, probably, but I don't know. If he could write an update that would incorporate what we now know, because we are now 20 years past when this book was published. But I think it's fair that he addressed the stuff that we're dealing with now with the internet was nascent back then. You could see indications that it was on the way and that was having an effect. So he goes into that as well as he could at the time. So I think he also talks about, so many people would say the big government or the welfare state. And he doesn't like this idea because he ties it to the percent of GDP. So the percent of the gross national product that is spent by the government, and he says it doesn't really correlate. The government spending was much higher in the 40s and 50s relative to everything else than it was later. I think the problem with here is it doesn't necessarily matter what the aggregate spending is. It's how it's spent, and even more importantly, what is the ideology. And this is something, if you read books on the welfare state or American philanthropy, and here I'm thinking about too, The Tragedy of American Philanthropy, and by Charles Murray's book, I forget what it's called, but the idea there was that we've always had welfare programs. Now, that most of them are private, but we've had government welfare programs for a long time, and most of the ones that we associate with the welfare state today, they had antecedents in the 40s and 50s, but in the Great Society in the early 60s, there was a very big shift in the rhetoric to if you're entitled to welfare, like but up to that point, welfare was, man, you really messed up. This is only because you've screwed up, and that we have society has some kind of value in your humanity, very likely for Christian reasons, and we're going to give this to you. But honestly, it's kind of uh, it's it's not something for you to be proud of. You should be ashamed that you're taking welfare, and you should try and get off it as soon as possible. That rhetoric kind of shifted to, you're entitled to this. Life's not fair. You got a bad deck of cards. This is the restitution you're owed. This might have a racial element. It might not. We do see that interest in welfare programs is not uniform across all people of similar below the poverty line. Right, certain cultures that take it and certain cultures that don't. Well, not 100%, but there are tendencies. For instance, Mormons don't take it very much even when they're poor. Appalachians don't take it as much even if they're poor. But there was a big shift in rhetoric, and I think another way to talk about this is it used to be if it was understood that the government's probably not going to do anything or not do anything very, very meaningful, then it kind of falls on you. I remember reading about one of the famous British philanthropists in the 19th century saying he just got tired of stepping over babies in the street. You'd see these abandoned orphan babies. Maybe their parents died. Maybe their parents just couldn't afford them. And these babies are just left off. And the thing is, the government wasn't going to do anything. And so you could either ignore it or you could do something about it. Nowadays, that wouldn't be the attitude, right? If you saw homeless people, say in New York City, you wouldn't go, what am I going to do to help this? It bothers me, so I should do something. You're going to say, well, the government should take care of that. And my part in that is to cast a vote, right? And it gives people a lot of moral expultation. It's an exculpatory way for people to escape kind of any real responsibility. And we see this in lots of ways, right? We have Social Security, so you don't need to save because you have Social Security, and also means you don't really need kids because the government will take care of you when you get old, not your children. Normally, it should be your children taking care of you when you get old. So you want to have like quite a few so that some of them are going to survive and be successful enough and love you enough to take care of you. But if you're going to have Social Security, like, well, you still want to have kids, but you only need like one or two because you don't really need them to take care of you because Uncle Sam will do that, which is super dangerous thing to believe, but it's the natural thing, right? You're paying for it, and you're being told that this is what it's for by all the authorities, right? And it's not just the government, but all the government-funded schools are going to tell you the same thing. So it's kind of natural that people believe that. And likewise, the government's there to help people and to provide welfare. It's been doing it for 50 years or more, depending on the program. And so I don't need to actually go and help the poor. I don't need to actually go and engage in charity or philanthropy, which you can just go vote, or nowadays just post on social media. If you can just virtue signal that you're a Bernie bro or you like Elizabeth Warren's plan, well, that's all you need to do. You don't actually have to go out and do anything. So I think he raises a worthwhile point when he says, well, the total amount, the proportion of the economy that's based on government spending didn't really correlate too well. That's fine, but there were big ideological shifts that do actually correlate a lot better that he doesn't talk about. Maybe he just didn't think about them or not. I don't think, obviously this guy's not an anarcho-capitalist, Puttnum I'm talking about here. But I also don't think he made any kind of real attempt to apologize for the government, right? I think he did make a good faith. He heard this argument. He did a good faith attempt to, put it in there and discuss it. He wasn't just trying to hatch a job it or anything like that. I just didn't think he did a great job when it came to that anyway. So, there's all that. Like, it's gone down. It's a bad thing. I would argue that the state is a big part of that. I mean, the state is a big part for the breakdown in families. He talks about that. That apparently doesn't correlate too well. Single moms aren't necessarily less involved than two-parent homes. So that's a kind of an interesting aside. But then he goes into what we should do about it, and he really doesn't have much of an answer here. And it's kind of depressing. But I do think that there's definitely crowding out happening, and the government is largely responsible for this. And the government, and then also the the conglomeration of special interests that support and are primarily benefited by the government. So the universities, the unions, some of the corporations, especially the bigger ones. You might even say most of the corporations, depending how much of a left libertarian you are. So this is just something that I found very fascinating. Like on a personal level, I can say that, after college and through work, I really wasn't socializing that much. I did my own thing. I'd be home. I'd go out, but not a ton. And then the first kind of nascent thing was when I joined a gym. And gym, there's a fine line between socializing and doing your own thing, right? People are there to work out. They should be there to work out. You should be there to work out. You should have fitness goals that you're working towards, and so should they. And being around each other and interacting should not interfere with that. And most people, they don't. Although there are definitely people who are going to the gym to socialize, period. On the other hand, you are seeing these people every day. You have a mutual interest, right? You're both going to the gym. So even if your fitness goals specifically are not the same, you have fitness goals, presumably at least, and you're putting time into them. And some people, if you're seeing them very regularly, you're putting in very similar amounts of time, right? There's those people I see like almost every day, almost at the same time. It's like, okay, you and I both work out at 11 o'clock every day. That's a lot that we have in common, so, I mean, out of the totality of a human's existence, no, that's not a lot, but it's something, and it's very easy then to end up kind of really connecting with somebody. And I know that I had a guy who I started seeing at the gym. We started hanging out. We became sauna buddies. We would go and we would do the sauna, and we would talk there, and we became close. And it was kind of weird. Kind of the epiphany of that was after we'd known each other a year. He had just gotten married and built a new house with his wife, and they were having a Halloween party. And he said, "Hey, do you want to? I want to invite you to my Halloween party." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I know you and I know your wife. I don't really know anyone else that you know. I'm not from the area." He goes, "No, no, it'd be awesome." So I go to his place, and indeed it was kind of awkward because it was his family, his cousins, all the people he went to high school with, people, close associates like that, and I didn't know any of them. And it was kind of strange because people would say, "Oh, okay, I'm so and so's cousin, or second cousin, or I'm married to his sister, or whatever." When we went to high school together, how do you know? I'm like, "Oh, we were sauna buddies. We met in the sauna and we sauna together 2 or 3 times a week." So a little awkward, but then towards the end of the night, he came up to me and he was like, "This is really strange because like I only met you like a year ago, and these people have pretty much known my whole life or most of my whole life, and yet I feel very close to you because, well, I mean, we're sitting in the sauna naked together a couple times a day, a couple times a week." So, we didn't go to the gym for that reason. That's not why we started hanging out, but that kind of happened. Even more important since then, about 2 years ago, I started taking jujitsu classes. And I started taking jujitsu classes because I wanted to learn a martial art, and I had looked around, and there's consensus, although some fair debate about what's the most effective. But most people seem to say, hey, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a pretty effective martial art. It's one of the most effective. If you're only going to do one, obviously, if you learn everything, that's better. But one at a time. And so I was like, okay, I want to do this. And so you join. And of course, I was going 7 to 9 hours a week. And you end up seeing like these people 7 to 9 hours a week. And you're not on a team where you're competing necessarily, but you're with them every day. You're working towards a similar goal. And before long, it becomes very social. Now you're going, you're practicing, you're trying to get better. They're trying to get better. But you start to get close, and next thing you know, people are inviting you over for Thanksgiving, and people want to hang out, and people want to know how you're doing or if you need help. And just recently, when I just totaled my truck a couple weeks ago in Wyoming, and I told one of my jiu-jitsu friends, he's like, "Hey, if you need it, I've got a spare car. If you want it, if you need it." I don't think he was going to give it to me, but like, just if you need it until then, it's fine, And these are unsolicited, and that's one of the things that Puttnum talks about. In your social net, if you're a social organization, you have the people who are, it's fascinating, you have people who are in your socioeconomic group, like so your relatives, usually people you grew up with, and you rely on them for support. But then if you are in an organization that is vertical, has vertical integration socially, so you are meeting people who are maybe richer than you, better connected, or below, that's a really great place to network. So if you're very poor, but you're going to a church and there's wealthy people going to that church, or successful business people who go to that church, and you connect over Bible study or whatever, there's a good chance that one of those people could offer you a job. And it turns out that almost all not almost all, but a huge proportion of advancement career-wise is based on who you know and who did you meet. And these organizations provide that for people. And it also provides a place so you don't have this bifurcation or stratification of the society where, okay, everyone's their own little thing. So if you're rich, you're just in your own really little mansion and you're not going out and meeting people who are poor. And yet, if you have organizations that incorporate both types of people, and I'm not saying that every organization needs to do that, but some organizations will, then you're going to have intersocial cohesion and engagement and dialogue that you wouldn't normally have. And again, I see this both at the gym and in jiu-jitsu, right? Many of the guys at my gym are rich. They're the mayors. There's the aldermen, the lawyers, the successful businessmen, people with multiple houses who are yachting around. And there's also college kids who are dirt poor. There's, people who are working class people who drive plows. And it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu. There's people who are entrepreneurs who are, wealthy and they're doing well. There's doctors. There's also just college kids and whatever. And yet in that setting, in that organization, there's an equality of status and an interaction that might not necessarily be there. If I met that doctor at his office, we're not going to be on the same level as if I meet him on the mat and I choke him out. So, and this, of course, that's totally, did not join those organizations for social benefits. But they're there. And I will also say sauna talk also leads to many jobs. Many of the guys there have gotten jobs from guys they met in the sauna. Okay. And there's certain cultures where this is actually like explicitly practiced in Scandinavia and Finland and Russia. There's a big part of that culture. So it's not only, it makes it sound when I say that it's beneficial in the sense of materially. Oh, you could benefit, you could get a better job, you could get a car or whatever. And that's all true, and that's not something to sneeze at, but it's deeper than that. That's a really good way to socialize. It's a good way to have those connections that we do need. Now, humans can live without them. I was reading about coyotes of all animals, and one of the reasons coyotes have done really well, whereas other predators in North America basically went extinct, specifically wolves, bears, is that wolves, their great strength is that they're social animals and there's a strict hierarchy and you have the alpha and the beta, and they can work together as a team, and that makes them phenomenally powerful. But that also makes them phenomenally vulnerable, because if you can kill one or two individuals in a pack, the pack cohesion kind of breaks down. And lone wolves have a very hard time making it. Coyotes are different. Coyotes can be very social. They can work together. They can form packs. They can form very large packs. But if there's a lot of resource stress, or if they're getting attacked or whatnot, they can become individual animals that live and thrive and reproduce as individual animals. I forget there's a technical term for this, but it's very, very rare. Most mammals are one or the other. They are not both. Coyotes can do it, and humans can do it. So there are humans who do live hermit lives in the Amazon rainforest, and that can work, and that should be permitted. But humans also can socialize and tend to like to socialize. Now, one of the problems is, especially with people who are invoking humans' social status to justify a political system, as the type of societies that humans evolved in, I think this is without dispute, hunter-gatherer societies. They're relatively small. You don't start getting, urban centers, settled settlers and centers until the very end of the Mesolithic and the start of the Neolithic. So we're talking about a 10,000 year period. And of course, it wasn't like all of humanity moved to Çatalhöyük or Ur 10,000 years ago. Only a very small proportion of the human population did that immediately. It may have not even been as little as 1,000 years ago until most people lived that way. We can debate that number. It's not exactly known, but evolutionarily speaking, humans are hunter-gatherers who live in small groups, numbering in the dozens to the low hundreds. And there's this famous number, the Dunbar's number, Obviously, you can recognize many more faces than this. You can name many more people than this. You can interact with many more people than this. But the number of people that you can actually like see as human and socialize and fully empathize with is something like 150 to 250. And so when you start talking about states with even hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people, that is an aberrant to our evolution in terms of being, if we have any kind of evolutionary psychology whatsoever, it wasn't designed for that. Now, maybe we're able to cope with it. Clearly, we are able to cope with it, although I think it comes with certain stresses and costs. It's still worth doing for a lot of people, and maybe even most people, because there's obviously benefits that come with it as well. But to say, well, humans are social, so we need states with 100 million people, or else it doesn't work. That's not inferred. I think the much smaller groups are probably the more natural, not to invoke the naturalistic fallacy too much. So again, now the libertarian perspective on all this is that the optimal way to do this is probably to defer to people's preferences, because each person has a different value set, and to allow them to organize voluntarily. So to cite the examples I like to, I think that working out is very beneficial. I think everybody could become stronger and healthier if they did it. However, not everyone values their health and their strength the same, right? You might even really value your health and your strength, but you might have something else that matters even more, right? Let's say you have a family, you have children, you have a wife, and you really want to take care of them. And because of your situation, you don't have time to go to the gym. Well, I don't think that you're wrong. You might even say, I really want to work out and I really do value my health, but this matters more. Or maybe the business that you operate, or maybe, you don't value it very much at all. Maybe, yes, you would like to be healthy, but you'd also really like to eat pizza every day. And maybe or smoke. And you know what? You should be free to do that. Now, if there's a cost associated with that, if you become unhealthy and you need additional medical costs because of that choice, then I think that you should bear the cost of that choice. And if you want to ask for help, that's fine, but you should not feel that others are obligated to subsidize your choices, because they're not. And then, of course, if they are obligated to subsidize your choices, the moral hazard problems are enormous. So you should be free, and you should be free to say, this is who I want to organize with. And if you want to join a gym, you should be able to do it. And if you don't want a gym, you shouldn't have to do it. And if you want to go and learn a martial art, you should be able to pick which one and how often you want to go. And if you don't, you shouldn't have to, and you shouldn't be made to do this. And I think a huge problem we have in political philosophy is everybody has their personal preferences, and I include myself here. But unlike libertarians, most people then will say, well, this is a normative thing, right? I value X, Y, and Z, therefore you should also value X, Y, and Z, and not just value them, but value them in the same proportions. So I think that a third of your income should go to healthcare, and a third should go to housing, and I've had socialists actually tell me this, right? And even the non-overt socialists, the nationalists, the conservatives, almost all their positions are ultimately rest on this. Like, oh, well, you can have some freedom and autonomy, that's fine, but at the end of the day, you need to value the integrity of the United States this amount, and the amount is whatever the government says they're going to tax you, right? So that's a problem, right? You're imposing suboptimal ideas on people to the extent that people don't agree with you, and most people aren't. So now what can we do about it? Well, the government's not going to go away anytime soon, more than likely. But what Puttnum points out in the book is that it's healthy. It feels good. It feels good to have that connection with people, and that's something that you can control. It's just like you can't control everything, but you can control your body, and you can control if you are socializing in ways that are beneficial. So I encourage people to go and join clubs and to organize, and it doesn't have to have an overt political bent. In fact, that's probably not healthy if that's all you ever do. I found it enormously beneficial to become a gym goer and to become a member of a jiu-jitsu place, and I want to do more. I feel like I want to socialize with them more, start having picnics, start having get-togethers, just to enhance that. It's not with a particular end in mind, but just because it feels good for me and it feels good for them. Oh no, yeah, it might actually be beneficial in some other material sense down the line, potentially. That's not the reason to do it. That's more like a perk, but still. And along those lines, if we're going to talk about socializing, another side project here. So I made a couple other videos about it, and I'll probably do another one soon. Uh, I have started a subreddit on communal showering. Now, most of you know this is something that I've been very interested for a long time. There is just so little research about this. It's so little discussed that I've started this subreddit basically as a collection point where people can come and talk about it. Stories, personal anecdotes, information of which there's not a ton that's directly related, but I'll put a link in the description here. If this is a topic that you are in any way interested in, go ahead and check that out. There's stuff on it. I'm the only moderator. I just started it like a month ago, and it's only got a couple people, so I'm pimping it out here. But this is my channel, so I'm allowed to do that. And that to me, there's something definitely to that. I know that the cliche is, well, you're fucking gay. Of course, you're going to say that. And fair point. I don't deny that, but there's definitely much more to it, and there's just not a lot on there. So this is something that I'm going to dig in a little bit more as time goes on. And that is going to be a collection point for my thoughts and stuff I can learn. There's already a couple people on there who have a lot to say, and it's very interesting. It's one of those topics very similar to foreskin restoration or circumcision, where people don't discuss it openly that much, but there's a certain percentage of the population, and I don't kid myself that it's a majority, but it's definitely out there, right, where they have thought about it and they do have an opinion, and they are, might even say, passionate about it, but it doesn't really fit into the context of most social dialogue, and so it's just kind of left unsaid. And first of all, I'm just interested in the topic, so I want to talk about it, but it's also, there's an added reason. If this is something that's taboo or never comes up, it makes me want to talk about it even more, even though sometimes it can certainly be awkward or not. I mean, there's a cost. You're imposing a cost whenever you kind of violate a social norm like that, to the extent that that's a violation of a social norm, which is debatable. So anyway, I'll put a link to the podcast. I'll put for the Apple iTunes, and for the others, there'll be an episode, basically a recording of this video, and then I'll also put a link to the Communal Shower subreddit, which you could probably find if you just did a Reddit search on my name, because I'm the mod of that channel, of that subreddit. Fortunately, I had enough karma that I could do it. I don't use Reddit that much, but I think some of my upvoted comments in the anarcho-capitalist subreddit from 4 or 5 years ago really kind of pulled me through on that. So, yeah. Now, let's see, is there anything else? But yeah, Bowling Alone is a really good book. It's touching on a lot of interesting questions, and there's obviously a libertarian solution, not solution, but perspective that can add to that. And I found it a very, very useful book. I'm glad that I finally got a chance to, like I said, I didn't read it. I audiobooked it. I think might be the only, no, I bought Game of Thrones as well. It's one of the very few books that I have in hard copy and an audiobook. But anyway, it's midnight here tonight, so I think I'm going to call it good there. But thanks again for watching or listening if you're listening to this on the podcast, and I hope you all have a great day.